Hello everyone, Silent K here, and it's time for the final card review. Before we get into the last batch of cards though, we have to do a quick update. I was hoping to go the entire expansion review without missing any major references to fairy tales or lore, but I did miss one or two last episode. First up, there's Tin Soldier. This is a main character from the fairy tale Steadfast Tin Soldier by Hans Christian Andersen. A boy receives a set of tin soldiers as a gift, and one of them is missing a leg since there wasn't enough metal to complete him. Upon seeing a paper ballerina also standing on one leg, he falls in love. A goblin warns him to stay away from her though. Fast forward through some trials and tribulations, and both the tin soldier and the ballerina end up getting thrown into a fireplace where they both melt together and form a heart. Here, our plucky hero seems to defy that fate as he leaps out of the fireplace, however. I should probably also upgrade the score of March Hare to +1. I wasn't thinking about Tin Soldier being able to hit face, which makes it a decent amulet for aggressive decks running Garuda. Mad Hatter is still trash though. Then there's Illusionist. Someone pointed out that she was a reference to The Little Match Girl, another fairy tale by Hans Christian Andersen. I actually have a figure of The Little Match Girl in my collection, and I obviously have the Hans Christian Andersen anthology. But I didn't even notice she was holding a match and a basket of matchboxes in the card art. I went and checked her Rage of Bahamut lore, and she was released during an Alice event, but she's not supposed to literally be the Little Match Girl. With the illusions and the matchbox motif, however, I think it's safe to say it's a loose reference. The Illusionist in Rage of Bahamut seems to be melancholy about a city that has died off, and she's remembering the days it was alive and full of people. Over the course of her card upgrades, she spreads her illusions until they cover the city, and she brings it back to life, but only as a fantasy. In the story of The Little Match Girl, a girl is selling matches in order to help collect money for her destitute family. After failing to sell any matches, she lights a match for some warmth, and in its light she sees visions which wane as the matches burn out. First a vision of a warm stove, then a holiday feast, then a Christmas tree, and finally her late grandmother. In an effort to keep her grandmother's vision alive, she lights the entire bundle of matches, and, well, that's as much as I can say. Alright, so moving on to the last few cards. First up for Bloodcraft, Disagreeable Demon. 3 mana 2/3. Fanfare, gain ward if an enemy follower is in play, gain +2/+0, and deal 2 damage to your leader if no enemy followers are in play. On the contrary, this card is quite agreeable. If your opponent is threatening favorable trades against your 1/2s or 2/1s, she's a defensive play to protect them, and if they haven't played anything, she's an aggressive play with a higher than average stat value. Overall, she's a pretty nice flexible card. +1. Next, Phantom Cat, 6 mana 5/5. Fanfare, draw 2 cards. Deal 2 damage to the enemy leader for each neutral card drawn. This guy isn't the actual Cheshire Cat, but he seems to be a fan, considering the iconic purple and pink stripes, the toothy grins, and the name of the card, which are all pretty obvious Cheshire Cat motifs. Rage of Bahamut has an actual Cheshire Cat card though, and I'm fine with them leaving it out since the card art is kinda weak. Speaking of Cheshire Cats, I've always been proud of my Cheshire car that I designed in APB Reloaded. If you've never played APB, the customization in that game is insane. You get to design every detail if you want to, and this car was entirely designed by me. I also designed the American McGee's Alice character as well. As for the card drawer attached to a decent follower is always great, and in this case your opponent is paying the costs. He's pretty strong even if you aren't playing a neutralcraft deck to take advantage of the damage, and if you are playing a neutralcraft deck, he's obviously even better. At 6 mana he probably won't be helping any highly aggressive decks, but in slower decks he's going to be really good. Overall +1 for normal decks, +2 for neutralcraft. On to Dragoncraft, Ebon Beast Warrior, 7 mana 6/8, ward. Fanfare, randomly discard one of the lowest cost Dragoncraft cards in your hand. I'm not sure if this guy is a joke or what. Bronze cards usually pay for ward with a stat point, so I guess you could say he's 2 stat points above power curve, but that's not at all worth the discard. And it is a Dragoncraft card that gets discarded, so you could say it's a neutralcraft card. But even then, it's just a mid-game vanilla ward, and those don't see play. Overall, -2. Next, Dramatic Dragon Blader. 3 mana 5/6, ward. Fanfare, summon an enemy dragon. When you evolve it, you get to banish an enemy dragon. It doesn't gain any stats, however. First of all, keep in mind that there isn't any dragon tribal tag in this game, so you won't be banishing Ouroboros or Bahamut anytime soon. You only get to banish a 5/5 dragon token. This card is interesting, but it's very hard to justify running it. If you play it without evolving it, you're only putting 1 stat point on the board over your opponent. A dragon is a 5/5, you're putting a 5/6 on the board. It's basically like playing a 0/1 ward for 3 mana. If you do evolve it, you get to banish the dragon, but a normal 3 cost is a 2/3 that evolves into a 4/5, so you're only getting +1/+1 over a normal 3 cost. Also, if you don't deal with the dragon immediately, your opponent gets to use their dragon before you get to use your Dragon Blader, which means you can potentially be handing the initiative to your opponent, which is a terrible thing to do. The one scenario where this card is fantastic is against an aggro deck with a full board, so you get to put an overstatted ward on the board to protect against the incoming damage, and they don't get a dragon. It's interesting, but it falls short of being playable. It's not a good card in enough situations to be worth it. Overall, -1. Next, Dragon Sculpture. 4 mana amulet. At the end of your turn, transform this amulet into a dragon if the opponent has more cards in play than you. The flavor of the card is nice, but if you're behind on the board, it's just a 5/5/4 that you aren't allowed to use the turn you play it. If you're in desperate need of evolving to take care of something on the opponent's board, you're not allowed to do that. If you're ahead on the board, you're basically just banking tempo for later. So even in the best situations, it's not great, and the risk of not being able to evolve this when you need to isn't worth it. Overall, -2. On to Forestcraft. Tweedledee, Tweedledum. 2 mana 2/2. Fanfare. Add 1 to the number of cards played this turn. The Tweedle twins are often included in adaptations of Alice in Wonderland, but they don't actually appear in that story. They appear in the second book, Through the Looking Glass. This card is a new bit of utility, which fudges the number of cards played to help with combo cards. It's interesting, but there aren't many combo cards that even exist considering the number of expansions we've had so far. And out of those, only Roach, Tia, and Glimmering Wings see any amount of play, so the combo mechanic could definitely use some love. It's hard to score this card since it's a decent helper card for a mechanic that doesn't really see enough play. And at the same time, it doesn't really do anything that 2 fairies or other 1-cost cards can't already do, aside from taking up less space on the board. But that can be important. Overall, 0. Next, Snowfield Warrior. 4 mana 3/3, Rush. Whenever this follower attacks and destroys an enemy follower, gain +1/+1 if this follower is not destroyed. Rush damage always has some chance to see play, but as I said before, Forestcraft doesn't rely on followers that are pretty decent, and this guy isn't even really up to the pretty decent standard. Fairy Knight did see some minor play in 1-turn kill Forest, but she does have the benefits of being cheaper and putting a fairy into your hand for the same amount of damage. And most importantly, this guy isn't even an elf or a fairy, I mean, come on. Overall, -1. On to Havencraft. Tenko, 5 mana 4/5. Whenever an allied follower attacks, restore 1 defense to your leader. In Japanese folklore, a Tenko is the fox's final form. After living for 1,000 years and gaining a 9th tail, the fox ascends to the heavens and becomes a celestial fox, or a Tenko. As for the card, it's another one that's subpar in most Haven decks, but it's pretty good in Alana Haven. In the mid game, you have Holy Falcons from Beast Call Arias, and you have evolve points to make sure that this procs at least once. Alana Haven still has some flex room since it's forced to run questionable cards like Frog Cleric and Pegasus Statue sometimes. Overall, +1 for Alana Haven. Next, Birdkeeping Disciple, 4 mana 4/3, Fanfare. Put a Pinion Prayer into play. A Pinion Prayer gives you a Holy Falcon, the 2/1 Storm follower. It's a very straightforward card. I'm not super familiar with Stormhaven, but it seems like the deck has enough room to squeeze this card in for 2 extra storm damage. Overall, +1 for Stormhaven. Onto Runecraft, Witch's Cauldron, 1 mana amulet, last words, draw a card. It's Teachings of Creation for 1 less, but you have to wait for the card. Card draw is always pretty good. Earthright Rune relies heavily on draw since they need both sigils and Earthright cards, so anything with card draw can be considered for the deck. Earthright Rune is another deck I'm not super familiar with, so I can't say for certain which sigil should be replaced with this one, but I could make arguments for a few of them. Overall, +1. Next, Mr. Heinlein, Shadow Mage, 6 mana 5/6, Ward. Fanfare, if there are any cards in your hand that have been spell boosted fewer than 5 times, spell boost those cards until they have been spell boosted a total of 5 times. His card text is nice and he doesn't pay for any of it with stats. One of the issues with spell boost cards is top decking them and needing them before they're powered up. If you hold on to this guy, you can kickstart any spell boost cards you draw into. A pretty decent effect to add consistency to spell boost decks, but nothing too crazy. Overall, +1. Onto Shadowcraft, Demon Eater, 2 mana 1/2, Fanfare, destroy an allied follower and draw 2 cards. Doesn't activate if no other allied followers are in play. It's Soul Conversion on a stick. Unfortunately, raising the cost in order to attach a 1/2 makes the card unplayable in many decks, since Soul Conversion's combo potential is very important. It's the difference between being able to suicide your Kawi on turn 8 and turn 9. It's the difference between playing a cheap follower, immediately killing it for cards, and having X mana left to play with, and having X minus 1 mana left to play with. Very aggressive decks that can afford to play 2 mana Undercurve can probably get away with playing this, and maybe the 1/2 body is worth it. Another consideration is combo decks where you have to just draw as many cards as possible. But in general, Soul Conversion is still going to be a better card. Overall, -1. Next, Siren's Tears, 2 mana amulet, destroy a random allied Shadowcraft follower at the end of your turn if you have both the Shadowcraft follower and a neutral follower in play. Then give a random allied neutral follower +X/+X, X equals the attack of the destroyed Shadowcraft follower. It's an interesting card for Neutralcraft. One of the few Shadowcraft cards I fit into my old Neutralcraft deck was Necro Assassin for the tempo she provides. Since Lurching Corpse requires an additional activator played after Lurching Corpse, if you had a Siren's Tears already on the board, you could gain even more tempo by getting the same effect with a 2 mana Lurching Corpse, and you also get a buff to boot. The trade-off being that you're adding another Shadowcraft card to your Neutralcraft deck. I'm not sure you want to dilute your Neutralcraft deck with enough Shadowcraft cards to make this amulet worth it. At least you wouldn't want to with the Zoo or Control style decks that I assume Neutralcraft will be able to pull off. It might work in a different kind of deck, so I hesitate to call this good or bad. I'll give it a wishy-washy 0. Onto Swordcraft, Kunoichi Master, 5 mana 3/2, Ambush. Fanfare, summon a Kunoichi trainee. Kunoichi is the Japanese word used for a female ninja, and here we have Kunoichi Master with Ambush and the same number of stats as Ninja Master, just distributed differently. You get a total of 5/3 with Ambush instead of 4/4 with Ambush. Ninja Master used to be playable in really old mid-range decks, but nowadays you only see him if he pops out of an enhanced Art of the Ninja. The low HP of Kunoichi Master and Trainee also make them more susceptible to AoE than Ninja Master. And once again, it's a 5 cost, so there's a lot of competition, regardless of which deck you're playing. It's a nice design, but it's probably not going to see any play. Overall, -2. And the final card of the set, Heroic Lion, 6 mana 4/5, Ward. When this follower is attacked, gain +1/+1. Keep in mind we haven't gotten an official translation for this card yet, so everything is very much subject to change. Normally I don't do untranslated cards, but this one was revealed a while ago, and it still hasn't been officially translated, so I sort of have to include it. And this guy is basically Rajin Etten with a little bit more card text. The card text does matter. If your opponent has hard removal, then the stats aren't going to matter anyway. but if they don't have hard removal and they go to trade into it, then you're going to get the full stats during combat. However, it's still just a vanilla mid-game ward, and there aren't any vanilla mid-game wards that see play. They're just too susceptible to hard removal, so overall -2. And with that, we've covered all the cards from the upcoming Wonderland Dreams expansion. I did want to do a little bonus feature though, and talk about some of the other fairy tale and folktale cards that are already in the game that you might not know about. I am going to be cherry picking a little bit though. If I went into detail on every card that had some sort of story attached to it, we would be here all day, since that's like half the cards. So I tried to narrow it down to cards with a specific story, not just general mythology. So without further delay, first up, Humpty Dumpty. We all know this guy, and we've already talked about him since Explosion is coming in the new expansion. As said before, he is the star of a nursery rhyme and has been featured in countless media, including the second Alice book, Through the Looking Glass. And then we have the girl from The Red Shoes, featured on Dance of Death. The Red Shoes is a fairy tale by Hans Christian Andersen, in which a vain girl is forced to dance forever in her favorite red shoes. With no other choice, she asks an executioner to cut her feet off, and so he does, but her shoes continue to dance with the feet still inside them. Next, there is Robin Hood, a very well-known heroic outlaw from English folklore, known for robbing from the rich and giving to the poor. There's also Tam Lin. Tam Lin is a character of Scottish folklore who was captured by the Queen of Fairies and is rescued by his true love. Speaking of the Queen of Fairies, Titania and her husband Oberon are the names given to the Queen and King of the Fairies in Shakespeare's play A Midsummer Night's Dream. We also have a bunch of cards from the British legends of King Arthur and his Knights of the Round Table, including Arthurian Light, Tristan of the Round Table, Gawain of the Round Table, and Merlin. Then we have Vlad, aka Vlad the Impaler, aka Vlad Tepes, aka Dracula, aka yes, that Dracula. Vlad was a pretty typical crazed and blood-hungry ruler of medieval times, but it was Bram Stoker that first bridged the gap between the real-life Vlad and his fictional vampire counterpart. And there's also Alucard. Alucard is of course Dracula spelled backwards. Depending on the story, Alucard is sometimes the son of Dracula and sometimes an alias Dracula uses for himself. And finally, Kaguya. Kaguya is the central character in the Japanese folktale, The Tale of the Bamboo Cutter, also known as The Tale of Princess Kaguya. In the tale, a bamboo cutter finds an infant the size of his thumb inside of a stalk of bamboo one day. He takes her home to his wife, and they raise the child. Fast forward some time, and Kaguya realizes she's not from the earth. She's actually from the moon, and she must return to her people there. And with that, this video is concluded. I might have missed some cards, so feel free to share any in the comments below. Hope you all appreciated the lore. It was a lot of work researching it all, so I won't be doing it for future expansions, unless I'm as interested in them as I was with this one. As soon as the expansion launches, I will be doing a card pack opening as usual. And then after that, some constructed videos. I know I haven't done any in a while. I've been taking a little bit of a break since putting these videos together is a lot of work. But we'll be getting back to that soon. Thank you all for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video. Please tune in again next time.